Every day, a poised young woman gave a homeless Korean boy a meal from her modest provision shop. She didn't ask about his past, she simply saw a child in need. But one afternoon, the quiet street erupted with the sound of engines as 6 luxurious SUVs pulled up right in front of her door, and her entire world was turned upside down. Who was the powerful man stepping out of those cars, and why was he calling this homeless boy his heir? Prepare yourself for an emotional journey of sacrifice, danger, and a connection that defies all odds. My name is Kamina. I am a woman of simple means who runs a small street food business, but my heart has always belonged to a different world. The world of professional modeling. Every cent I earn is carefully tucked away in a secret box, a small sacrifice toward the day I can finally leave this life behind. My days are spent in a dark blue floral robe, my hair pulled into a neat bun, as I greet customers with a quiet strength that life has taught me to maintain. I know what it means to struggle, which is why every step toward my dream feels like a victory. One afternoon, as I settled down for a moment of rest, I noticed a small boy standing near my foot tent. He wore a torn, striped shirt and had a look of deep, vulnerable shock in his eyes that I recognized instantly. He didn't speak, he just stared at the food I was holding, looking as though the world had forgotten he existed. I didn't know then that this little boy, Do-yoon, was about to change the meaning of my life forever. The sun rose slowly over the busy street, casting a golden hue on the front of my small food tent. My morning routine was a ritual of quiet discipline. I stood before the small, cracked mirror in the back room, smoothing my hair into a tight, neat bun that sat perfectly at the nape of my neck. I adjusted my large gold hoop earrings, watching them catch the light. They were a small touch of the elegance I carried within me, a reminder that even though I spent my days weighing flour and stacking canned milk, I was destined for something more. I straightened my dark blue floral robe, its fabric worn but clean, and stepped out to face the day with a profile held high, a look of calm determination that masked the hunger of my ambitions. The tent was my world, but the wooden box hidden beneath my bed was my future. Every sale I made was a tiny victory in a long, silent war against poverty. I would arrange the drinks on the foldable shelves with meticulous care, greeting the early morning customers with a practiced smile, while my mind calculated the growing weight of the coins in that box. For 3 years I had denied myself the smallest luxuries, skipping meals, mending old clothes, and working until my bones ached, all for the sake of my modeling dream. I could almost see the bright lights of the runway, and the flash of the cameras whenever I closed my eyes. That box didn't just hold money, it held my dignity and my ticket out of this quiet life. I took pride in my work, ensuring every item was perfectly aligned, but the repetitive nature of the tasks often left my mind free to wander. I imagined the day I would finally have enough for a professional portfolio, a high-end photo shoot that would show the world the power I knew I possessed. My mother often watched me from the corner of the room, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and worry. She knew the weight of the dreams I carried, and the toll they took on my spirit. "Patience, Kamina," she would whisper. "God's time is the best." I would simply nod, adjusting a stray bottle on the shelf, my heart anchored by the secret knowledge of the box and the life I was building, one coin at a time. It was a mundane existence, punctuated by the clink of change and the scent of dry goods. But beneath the surface, a fire was burning, fueled by the hope of a transformation I was certain was coming. The afternoon heat began to settle over the tent, bringing a heavy stillness that usually signaled a lull in business. I was reaching for a crate of canned goods when I felt a presence, a small, silent shadow that hadn't been there a moment before. I turned slowly, my hand still resting on the shelf, and found myself looking into the eyes of a child. He was standing just outside the threshold, his small frame framed by the harsh sunlight of the street. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, but the expression he carried was far older. He wore a striped shirt, the fabric so thin and caked with dust that the colors had faded into a dull gray. His hair was messy, and his skin bore the marks of many nights spent without a roof, but it was his gaze that stopped my breath. He didn't beg. He didn't reach out his hand or cry. He simply stood there with a look of profound, vulnerable shock, as if the world had dealt him a blow he was still trying to understand. In that moment, looking at his East Asian features against the backdrop of my neighborhood, I saw a reflection of a life completely out of place. I felt a sudden, sharp ache in my chest, a memory of my own childhood when the kitchen cupboards were empty, and my mother's tears were the only thing we had in abundance. There was a wordless connection between us, a bridge spanning across two different worlds, built on the shared language of hunger and invisibility. I moved toward him, my blue floral robe brushing against the counter, and saw him flinch ever so slightly. It was the reaction of a creature used to being chased away, not invited in. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a whisper, trying to keep the calm determination I practiced for the world from sounding too stern. He didn't answer, but his eyes dropped to the bread I had placed on the counter earlier. He swallowed hard, a tiny movement in his throat that spoke louder than any plea. Without a second thought, I reached for the food and held it out to him. His small hands trembled as he took it, his fingers brushing against mine for a fleeting second. In that touch, I felt the coldness of his skin despite the heat of the day. He looked up at me then, the shock in his eyes softening into a flicker of disbelief. He didn't know my name, and I didn't know his was Do-yoon, but in that silent exchange, the secret box of my dreams felt suddenly, strangely distant. After Do-yoon finished the bread, he offered a tiny, jerky nod of thanks and disappeared into the afternoon haze. A restlessness took hold of me, a tugging at my heart that made the familiar space of my tent feel suddenly thin and fragile. I couldn't shake the image of his hollow eyes, so I closed the storefront early, adjusted my hoop earrings, and followed him at a distance. I watched from the shadows as his small, striped shirt flickered like a signal fire through the winding alleys of the neighborhood, leading me further away from the paved roads, and into a part of the city where the silence felt heavy and neglected. Finally, he stopped at the skeleton of an uncompleted building, a hollowed-out shell of concrete and rusted rebar that the world had long ago forgotten. I watched, my hand pressed against my mouth to stifle a gasp, as he climbed over a pile of broken masonry and vanished into the darkness of a windowless room. I crept closer, my blue floral robe snagging on the rough edges of the rubble, until I could peer through a gap in the bricks. There, in a corner where the wind whistled through the cracks, was Do-yoon's bed. A thin, filthy sheet of plastic spread over a heap of jagged stones, with a single tattered blanket neatly folded at the edge. There were no lights, no doors to keep out the night, and no mother to tuck him in. He sat on the cold floor, his small hands picking at the remnants of the food I had given him, looking so small and isolated amidst the towering gray ruins. The shock I had seen in his eyes earlier now made perfect sense. He was a child living in a graveyard of failed dreams. Tears blurred my vision as I realized that while I was busy counting coins for a glamorous future, a few blocks away, a soul was being slowly extinguished by the cold. I backed away quietly, my resolve hardening with every step. The poised profile I maintained for the world felt like a mask I no longer wanted to wear if it meant ignoring the rubble beneath my feet. I looked back at the dark silhouette of the building and made a silent vow. My modeling box was a symbol of my escape, but I realized that a true dream isn't just about where you are going. It's about who you refuse to leave behind. I wouldn't let him spend another night shivering in the dust. It was time to intervene, no matter the cost to my own carefully curated plans. The following morning, the air felt lighter, charged with a purpose that made my hands steady as I prepared a special surprise. I had dipped into my daily earnings to buy a new set of clothes for Do-yoon. A crisp, navy blue shirt and sturdy shorts that I hoped would replace the dusty, striped rags he called a uniform. I stood in front of my street food tent, the small paper bag clutched in my hands, my eyes scanning the road with the quiet strength of a woman who had finally decided to act. I imagined the look on his face when he realized he didn't have to hide in the rubble anymore. I finally saw him across the street, his small frame emerging from the haze of the morning traffic. He spotted me, and for the first time, a genuine, toothy smile broke across his face. He began to run, his little legs moving with an excitement that made my heart swell. He was so focused on reaching the shop, so intent on the safety I represented, that he didn't see the black car swerving blindly around the corner. The world suddenly slowed into a series of jagged, horrific images. I saw the car, moving far too fast for the narrow street, its engine roaring like a beast. I saw Do-yoon's small body step into the path of the speeding metal. I tried to scream his name, but the sound was trapped in my throat by a sudden, paralyzing terror. For a heartbeat, our eyes met, a final, silent connection across the divide. The shock that had always lived in his gaze intensified, a look of pure, frozen realization as he saw the danger he couldn't escape. Then came the sound that would haunt my dreams. The sickening screech of tires against the pavement followed by a heavy, hollow thud. The impact threw him into the air like a discarded doll. He hit the ground with a force that seemed to vibrate through the very soles of my feet. The car didn't stop. It sped away, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of acrid smoke and the lingering scent of burnt rubber. I dropped the bag of new clothes, the paper rustling softly as it hit the dirt, and ran toward the middle of the road. My blue floral robe fluttered behind me as I fell to my knees beside him. Do-yoon lay still, his striped shirt now stained with a terrifying shade of crimson. His eyes were half open, staring blankly at the sky, and the silence that followed the screech of tires was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The sterile, white corridors of the hospital felt like a cage, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and the heavy silence of waiting. I stood outside the heavy swinging doors of the emergency room, my hands trembling against the fabric of my blue floral robe, which was now marked with stains of Do-yoon's blood. Every time a nurse hurried past, I looked up with a desperate hope, my poised profile crumbling under the weight of a terror I had never known. My mother sat on a nearby bench, her lips moving in a silent prayer, but my mind was stuck in the moment of impact, the sound of the tires and the look of shock on that small, innocent face. A doctor finally emerged, his expression weary and grave. He spoke of internal injuries, of a life hanging by a fragile thread, and of an immediate surgery that was the only chance for survival. He handed me a slip of paper containing his medical bills. As I walked down the long hallway, the world seemed to tilt. When I reached the window and the clerk typed the numbers into the screen, the breath left my lungs. The amount required for the deposit was large enough to empty my savings, which I had painstakingly gathered in my secret box over the last 3 years. I leaned against the cold glass of the counter, my heart a battlefield. In my mind, I saw the bright lights of the runway I had dreamed of, the elegant life that was finally within my reach, and the freedom that box represented. If I gave this money away, my dream would die. I would be back where I started, trapped in the street food, foldable shelves, and a tent with nothing but the smoke and the heat from the food preparation on the corner of my street. But then, I saw Do-yoon. Not as a homeless stranger, but as the boy who had smiled at me with his whole heart just seconds before the car hit. The flaw of my own ambition, the fear of remaining stuck, fought against the love that had taken root in the silence of my shop. I realized that the power I had been chasing in magazines was hollow compared to the power to save a life. The struggle lasted only a moment, but it felt like a lifetime. I looked at the clerk, my jaw tightening with a new kind of determination. "I will be right back," I whispered, my voice thick with the weight of the choice. My dream was the price of his life, and for the first time, I knew exactly what it was worth. I hurried back to our small house, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I burst through the door. I didn't stop to explain anything to my mother. I went straight to my room and reached deep under the bed. My fingers brushed the rough wood of the box, the heavy, silent vessel of my 3-year sacrifice. I pulled it out and set it on the floor. In the dim light, the box looked like an altar where I had worshipped a future that was now slipping through my fingers. I looked around for something heavy and grabbed a small metal mallet from a drawer in our small garage. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. I thought of the registration fees for the modeling agencies, the high-heeled shoes I had bookmarked in catalogs, and the vision of myself standing under a spotlight, finally free from the scent of dry goods and dust. To break this box was to kill that woman. It was to admit that I might never leave the street selling food, that the poised profile I cultivated might only ever be seen by the neighbors on my street. Then, I saw the bloodstain on my blue floral robe. I saw Do-yoon's eyes as they rolled back in his head. I brought the mallet down with a deafening crack. The wood splintered, the lid flying open as the first blow shattered the lock. I struck it again and again, the sound echoing through the small room like a series of gunshots. Coins rolled across the floor, and crumpled notes spilled out like dead leaves. I fell to my knees, not in grief, but in a frantic, desperate rush. My hands shook as I scooped the money into a cloth bag. Every cent I had saved to buy my way into a different life. When I returned to the hospital, the air in the hallway felt even colder. I walked to the billing counter and placed the heavy bag on the ledge. The clerk looked at the piles of small denomination notes and loose coins, then back at me. I didn't say a word. I simply stood there with my head held high, my gold hoop earrings trembling slightly. As he began to count, I felt a strange, hollow lightness in my chest. My modeling career was dead. The dreams of runways and flashbulbs were being counted out and filed away into a hospital ledger. But as the clerk stamped the receipt and picked up the phone to alert the surgical team, I knew I had traded a ghost for a living soul. I walked back toward the operating room. A woman with no savings and no clear future, but with a heart that was finally, undeniably whole. The days following the surgery were a blur of hushed prayers and the steady hum of hospital machinery, but finally, the moment arrived when Do-yoon's eyes fluttered open. The shock that had once defined his gaze was gone, replaced by a soft, questioning flicker of recognition as he saw me sitting by his bed. When the doctors finally cleared him for discharge, I didn't take him back to the rubble of the abandoned building. Instead, I led him through the door of my small home, where my mother stood waiting with open arms and a warmth that seemed to heal the very air around us. Do-yoon moved through the rooms with a cautious, quiet wonder, his small hand never straying far from the hem of my blue floral robe. He touches every part of the house as if it were made of gold, his East Asian features softening into a look of disbelief that this is a real bed, a roof, and a family that is finally his. I watched him sit at our small table, dressed in the navy blue shirt I had bought him, eating a bowl of warm rice with a politeness that broke my heart. He was no longer a shadow in the rain, he was my son. A profound, unexpected peace settled over my life, one that the glitz of the runway could never have provided. I still ran my street food business, and I still wore my gold hoop earrings with pride, but the secret box beneath my bed remained empty, and surprisingly, I felt no regret. My poised profile was no longer a shield against a life I hated, but a reflection of the strength I found in motherhood. Each evening, as I helped Do-yoon with his lessons or listened to him laugh in the garden with my mother, I realized that my dream hadn't died when I smashed that box. It had simply transformed. I was no longer chasing a future defined by the eyes of strangers. I was living a present defined by the love of a boy who had been forgotten by the world, but found by me. As I tucked him into his clean sheets each night, feeling his small, steady heartbeat, I knew I was happier than I had ever been. The tent was still dusty, and money was still tight, but for the first time, my soul was not in a hurry to be anywhere else. The peace of our new life felt like a cocoon. But outside the walls of our small home, the world had been watching. I didn't know that on the day of the accident, while I was kneeling in the dirt and screaming for God to spare Do-yoon's life, someone had been recording. A bystander had captured it all. The horrific impact, the heartless flight of the black car, and the sight of a woman in a blue floral robe cradling a bleeding child as if he were her own flesh. The video had spread like wildfire through the digital veins of the city. It wasn't just the tragedy that captured people's hearts. It was the follow-up. Word had leaked out about the street food girl who had smashed her 3-year savings box to pay for a stranger's surgery. They called it the viral prayer. People shared the footage of me at the hospital counter, my gold hoop earrings trembling as I poured out a mountain of coins and crumpled notes to buy a child's survival. To the world, I was a hero, a symbol of selfless love in a city that often felt cold and transactional. But as the video reached the bright screens of the wealthy, it also drifted into the dark, shadowed corners where men of power operated in silence. In a high-rise office overlooking the city, a man with a stern, commanding presence sat behind a desk of polished mahogany. John, a man whose name was whispered with fear, watched the grainy footage on a loop. His dark sunglasses sat on the desk beside him, and his thumb traced a prominent ring on his hand as his eyes locked onto Do-yoon's face. He didn't see a homeless boy in a torn striped shirt. He saw a jawline that mirrored his own. He saw the shock in those eyes, the same look he had seen years ago during a night of fire and blood when his vehicle was run off the road, and his infant heir was lost to the darkness. For years he had operated with a win-at-all-costs attitude, building an empire of power, yet he was haunted by the one thing his wealth couldn't buy back. As the video played once more, showing me entering the ambulance taking Do-yoon to the hospital that very day. John stood up, his suit jacket sharp and his goatee perfectly groomed. The quiet strength I had shown was about to meet the raw force of his world. He didn't care about the viral fame or the heart-wrenching sacrifice. He only cared about the bloodline that had been found at a street food tent. He signaled to his men, and within minutes, 6 luxurious SUVs were roaring to life in the underground garage, ready to track the signal of a prayer that had traveled much further than I ever intended. The quiet afternoon was shattered by the rhythmic thrum of heavy engines, a sound far too sophisticated for our street. I stood at the entrance of my tent, my heart hammering against my ribs, as 6 luxurious SUVs pulled to a synchronized halt, their polished surfaces reflecting the humble stalls around them. The doors opened in unison, and a man stepped out together with some fierce-looking bodyguards who seemed to command the very air he breathed. He was middle-aged and East Asian, dressed in a sharp black suit and tie that looked like armor. He wore dark sunglasses that masked his intent, and as he approached, his goatee was perfectly groomed, framing a face of stern authority. I stepped forward, my yellow gown fluttering in the exhaust-warmed breeze, and placed myself firmly between this stranger and the space where Do-yoon was playing. I held my head high, my gold hoop earrings catching the sun, meeting his power with the quiet strength I had forged through sacrifice. The man stopped, removing his glasses to reveal eyes that were surprisingly bright with unshed tears. "I am John," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that vibrated with a hidden pain. He didn't look at me with the coldness I expected but with a profound, heavy respect. He explained the truth that had been buried in blood and fire years ago. A night where an assassination attempt had forced his car off a mountain road. He had survived, but his infant son, his only son, had vanished into the night, presumed dead by everyone but him. "For years I searched the shadows," he whispered, his fist clenching to reveal a prominent ring. "Until a video of a girl breaking a wooden box for a stranger showed me the face I thought I'd lost forever." Do-yoon peeked out from behind my robe, his eyes wide with that familiar shock. John knelt, a king descending from his throne, and reached out a trembling hand. He looked back at me and spoke of a debt that could never truly be repaid. He offered me a life beyond my wildest dreams, a home where I would never have to count coins again, the finest modeling contracts in the fashion capitals of the world, and a seat at his table as the woman who had restored his long-lost future to him. I looked at Do-yoon, then back at the man who had the power to change everything. My dream had come back to me, not through the box I had broken, but through the love I had chosen to protect. As I reached down to take Do-yoon's hand, I realized the transition was complete. We weren't just leaving the street food and tent behind. We were stepping into a destiny where my poise was no longer a mask, but the crown of a mother who had won it all. Comment below if this story inspired you. Smash that like button and subscribe to K-Mafia Story HQ for more stories. See you in the next one.